Welcome. This is Working with Realtors video tutorial number 1. My name is Jeffrey Smith. Working with Realtors. This is where you are acting as a finance consultant to help a real estate broker arrange the sale of a property between a buyer and seller using temporary seller financing. Temporary seller financing is where the seller offers financing to the buyer to buy the property, carrying back a note, and then selling that note to a third-party note buyer. This is a difficult concept for the average person. That's why you need a clear explanation and a presentation to show how this works. This spreadsheet will allow you to specify the seller financing parameters, the model debt on the property, the existing debt that's remaining on the property after sale. You can arrange for a wraparound note to sell to a third-party note buyer. You can arrange for a full purchase in the form of a first note and a second note. The first note is sold to the third-party note buyer, and the second note is kept by the seller for cash flow. Typically, you get the best yields and lowest risk by using a wraparound note. In this example, we have a single-family home, $1.8 million. We structure this deal by adding 6% discount points to the fair market value to arrive at the purchase price. The buyer will come in with a 10% down payment, and there are 0 points rolled into the debt present value, so that's a 90% loan to value. The monthly payment is calculated $15,300 according to a 9.75% annual interest rate amortized over 300 payments. That's 25 years. This is an installment sale of the wrap, and we're leaving the existing debt on the property. Monthly payments to the seller will be $5,900 per month for 84 months. That's 7 years until maturity. Minimum cash out at closing to the seller, $65,900. And when the note matures, we'll pay off the future lien. The total cash benefit to the seller for this transaction is $2,056,000. Adjusting for the future lien payoff, the net cash to seller over this transaction is $909,000. Now compare that to the $450,000 in equity that the seller has. We calculate closing costs, guesstimating 1.5% of the purchase price for other closing costs, real estate broker commission 5% of the purchase price, your finance consultant fee 2.5% of the purchase price, total closing costs $171,720. To purchase this wraparound note and keep the existing lien on the property, we bring in a third-party private financier or note buyer who brings in $46,820. This calculates a 20% yield on the purchase. The gross cash flow after paying the monthly payment to the seller, $9,400, subtracting the existing lien service, leaves a net cash flow of $704, and a balloon payment of $60,500. Since we're syndicating this to a note buyer or private financier, in this example we're taking a 15% split of the net cash flow, $105, and a 15% split of the net balloon payment, that's $9,075, and the private financier or the note buyer receives the remaining $599 in monthly cash flow and $51,427 of the balloon payment. This is a compounding investment. They're getting back more in the balloon payment than what they invested. This is an equity multiple of 2.17. For every dollar they're putting into the investment, they're getting back $2.17. This spreadsheet also has a worksheet to specify the parties, the seller, the buyer, and the broker. An escrow worksheet to specify the escrow company and their bank information for wiring the investment funds escrow account. You can also select whether you're buying the wraparound or the first, and how much of that investment, in case you want to use a group investment, more than one note buyer or private financier to make this investment. Typically you'll use 100%. You'll bring in one private financier to lend the funds to your company, and your company will buy the note with those funds and give the private financier a new promissory note in the name of your company and a hypothecation agreement pledging the note that you bought as collateral for their loan to you. You can specify property pictures on the property pictures worksheet. This worksheet simply prompts you for the URL for the path to the picture. Loads in the picture. You can specify up to 8 pictures. I recommend all 8 pictures. The more pictures, the better. You can specify the traditional sale parameters if the seller were to sell the property in a traditional sale where the buyer provides all cash at closing, either all equity or equity plus debt, all new money coming to closing. We see the broker commission and the closing costs are deducted from the equity, the investment proceeds, and the cash out. The proceeds are invested in a mutual fund at 5% annual yield, yielding a monthly cash flow of $1,112 and a total return of $360,500. We also calculate the cash flow to the seller, $5,900 per month for 84 months. So the total monthly cash flow is $495,600 plus the cash out plus the balloon payment, $347,668. Total cash to seller after paying off the existing lien, $909,168. Compare that to the total return from the traditional sale. We can also structure a first lien and a second lien where the seller sells the first note, keeps the second note for cash flow. In this arrangement, you would receive 10% of the cash flow from the note, $1,020, and 10% of the maturity, $103,700. The private financier would receive a monthly cash flow of $9,181, and a maturity of $933,256. This is an amortizing investment because the balloon is less than the initial investment. To purchase the first lien at 11% annual yield, you would need to raise $1,077,620. So the total return to the private financier is $1,700,000. That's a 1.58 equity multiple. For every dollar invested, the private financier receives $1.58. And the cash to the seller, gross cash at closing. This is after paying off the existing debt from the proceeds of selling the first note and the down payment. Closing costs, real estate broker commission, your finance consultant fee, net cash at closing, $32,900, total cash to seller over the life of this transaction, $542,000. So compare that with the $900,000 the seller receives by selling a wraparound note and keeping the existing debt on the property. This is how you are leveraging a liability into an asset. On the Best Buyer worksheet, this is where you specify your list of best buyers. You enter the data onto the worksheet, click the Add button. The spreadsheet stores that on another worksheet. The portfolio controls have similar buttons. You can try out different kinds of scenarios and add each scenario to the worksheet. It will store it on the portfolio worksheet. You can scroll through the various scenarios. You can export the data into a plain text file. You can then hit the Build button, which will take all of that portfolio data and merge it with all the other data in the spreadsheet. Then click the Save button, and it will save all those portfolios to a plain text file. You can also do a join operation where it joins all of the portfolio data with all of the best buyer data. So if you have, say, 2 portfolio scenarios and 3 best buyers, clicking the Join button will generate a mail merge worksheet which has 6 data rows. Thus, each portfolio data row is merged or joined with all 3 best buyers, and that happens twice. 2 times 3 is 6. Now, going over to Microsoft Word, we have the Proposal to Note Buyer Mail Merge template. On the Mailings pull-down menu, you would click on the Use Existing List and navigate to the folder where you saved the comma-separated values file using this button. That would import it into Microsoft Word. Then go up to Mailings, Preview Results, and the values are filled in. You can review this and edit it according to the scenario that you're trying to put forth. This shows the scenarios for both the split purchase of the wraparound and the full purchase of the first note, and the seller keeps the second note for cash flow. Typically what you would do is, if you're selling the wraparound note, you would simply highlight the primary note full purchase and delete it because that's not relevant to the transaction. We have the property parameters, the sale parameters. Since we're not keeping a secondary note, just triple click on that and delete it. We're not using rolled in points, just delete it. Purchase price is a premium price. The buyer comes in with just a 10% down payment. There's a wraparound note for this amount, and we sell that to a note buyer, either simultaneously at closing or a month later after the seller receives one payment from the buyer to establish that this is a note sale, not a loan origination. The existing lien remaining on title, we have the present value, the interest rate. It matures in 84 months with this balloon payment, and the monthly debt service. We also take note that the seller financing note shall wrap the existing lien. Seller financing terms, the annual interest rate 9.75%, amortization periods 300 months, that's 25 years. We have the debt service, other fees, escrow for taxes, escrow for insurance, the total monthly payment, the balance due at maturity in 84 months, the existing lien future value in 84 months, balloon payment to the note buyer, and balloon payment to note seller. Note buyer terms, the primary note purchase. We're buying the wraparound note and leaving the existing lien in place for a 20% gross yield on the investment. We have our cash flow after servicing the installment payments to the seller. Subtract the existing lien debt service, net monthly cash flow, subtract our 15% split of the cash flow. The note buyer receives the remaining amount. This is a compounding investment. So even though they're getting cash flow now, their investment of $46,820 is growing each month. So at the end of the transaction in 84 months, they'll receive back more cash than they invested from the balloon payment. Here's the net balloon payment. We subtract the 15% split for the finance consultant, leaving $51,427 for the private financier. That's a 16% net yield on the investment. Plus the monthly cash flow total, 84 payments of $599. Note buyer total return, $101,788. That's a 2.17 equity multiple. That is, for every dollar invested, the note buyer received back $2.17. That's an excellent return. Now for the split payment, the seller shall receive 84 payments of $5,900 each. Calculates $495,600 for the total monthly payments, plus the cash out at closing, plus costs for curing existing arrears, any pay down of the existing lien as an incentive to the lien holder to allow the conveyance. That is, if there's a due on sale clause, you may want to offer a nominal pay down to allow the conveyance. Typically you don't do this, you just wrap the lien and make the full payment according to the income from the wraparound. At maturity, we have a future lien payoff plus a balloon payment to the seller. Total cash benefit to the seller for this transaction is $2,056,000. Subtracting the lien payoff, the net cash to the seller for this transaction is $909,168 for a property with only $450,000 in equity. Split note purchase sources and uses. We show where the money is coming from and where it's going to. There's a 10% down payment from the property buyer, and there's a $46,820 investment from the note buyer. This represents a 73% investment to value. That is, the amount of this investment, $46,000, plus the existing lien on the property divided by the purchase price is 73%. That means there's plenty of protective equity in this deal to protect both the existing lien holder and the wraparound note holder. In case of default, the wraparound note holder can offer a cash for keys, can foreclose on the property, take it back, and sell it again on a wraparound. As long as the existing lien is kept current, there's no need to worry about the lien holder accelerating the note. Even if the note was accelerated, you can do a refinance to pay off that note, and you'll still have plenty of protective equity. Escrow closing costs estimated at 1.5%, real estate broker commission 5%, finance consultant fee at closing, total closing costs paid at closing, plus the cash out to seller, curing existing lien arrears and existing lien paydown. Total uses matches total sources. So all the funding coming in matches all the funding going out. Now then, we have PowerPoint presentations. This set of presentations, there's a proposal for the property buyer, a proposal for the property seller, and a proposal for the financier, that is the note buyer. These PowerPoint presentations include a third-party plugin from presentationpoint.com. This is a plugin where you can effectively do a mail merge from various sources. In this example, we're using text files, the CSV file. Click on Working with Realtors. The plugin will locate the input source and process it. You then edit the connection, click on Browse, navigate to the folder where the CSV file is that you saved from the worksheet. Click the Open. The first row contains field names. These are comma separated values, and columns are enclosed with double quotes. Make sure your refresh interval is 0 because this is static data. It doesn't change. Click OK. Go back up to data point, click refresh. This brings in the most recent version of the data. Now this PowerPoint presentation you can record with a third-party application, say Camtasia, and create an MP4 video that you can upload to screencast.com or YouTube. You can also save as a PDF file and email it. You'll need to replace the general manager information with your own information. And here we're talking about acquisition criteria is where my company is focusing its efforts. You'll need to change this template to your own parameters. And now we get into presenting the deal. This is the first picture in the Property Pictures worksheet, picture number 1. And then we have picture number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You would replace these pictures on the worksheet with actual pictures from the property. These are just samples that I took off the internet. These presentation slides use fly-in animation. So each time you would click the page down button, you would get the next line flying in. We first show the traditional sale parameters from the worksheet. This shows that in this example, the total cash to the seller for this 7-year transaction, $426,408 for the property, which has $450,000 in equity. Then we talk about seller financing. We use the second scenario where the seller creates a first lien and a second lien and sells the first lien to a third-party note buyer for cash, which pays off the existing debt and then keeps the second lien for cash flow. In this example, we're pricing the first lien note purchase at a yield of 11%. That's a 56% investment to value. That's very safe, protective equity on this investment. The financier is receiving 8.84% annual yield. That's an amortizing investment. It's amortizing because the future balloon payment, $933,000, is less than the initial investment. So the investment is being amortized over this time frame. The total return to the private financier is $1.7 million. That's an equity multiple of 1.58. For every dollar invested, the investor gets back $1.58. The seller is keeping a second position note at a 15% loan to value. Annual interest rate is a little bit higher, 11.5%. So he has slightly more cash to invest in the form of equity in the deal versus the previous scenario, the traditional sale. The monthly cash flow, both principal and interest, $2,909, with a maturity value of $264,877 in 7 years. So by calculating the investment on the first position note plus the down payment minus the existing debt, gross cash to seller, subtract the closing costs, subtract the finance consultant fee for arranging this note purchase, the real estate broker commission, net cash to seller $32,900. Compare that to the $65,900 in the traditional sale. We have the total monthly payments plus the balloon payment on the second note, total cash to seller $542,145 versus $426 from the previous scenario. Now we talk about the wraparound note. And we show how the wraparound investment works. We have a fair market value of $1,800,000. We add discount points to the fair market value to compensate for risk. Total purchase price. Subtract 10% down payment. The investment to value, 90%. Seller finance wraparound note. The annual interest rate, 9.75%. 300 payments. Fully amortized. The monthly payment, $15,302. Balloon payment in 7 years. Pay off the senior first lien future value. Pay off the seller with a balloon payment. Net maturity to note buyer, $60,500. We price the purchase of the wraparound note. We're buying the effective equity in the wraparound note. The effective equity is the difference between the note face value and the underlying debt remaining on the property. And we're getting a 20% annualized yield on the investment. So we're bringing in $46,820 from the private financier. 73% investment to value. That is the existing lien plus the investment on the note purchase totals 73% of the purchase price. There's plenty of protective equity in here in case of default. The private financier yield is 16%. That's a compounding investment. That means the future balloon payment to the private financier, $51,427, is greater than the initial investment, $46,820. So not only is he getting cash flow, he's also getting more cash on the back end. This is a compounding investment. Total cash to the private financier, they put in $46,800, they get back $101,700, 2.17 equity multiple. For every dollar invested, the private financier is receiving back $2.17. Let's look at how the seller fares in this arrangement. Second lien seller finance wraparound note. Wraparound notes are junior to the existing lien, technically in second position, but the total payment is used to service the existing lien and the note buyer cash flow and the seller's cash flow from the installment sale. In this example, the seller is receiving $5,900 per month instead of $2,900 in the previous scenario of arranging a first lien and second lien and selling the first lien and keeping the second lien for cash flow. Much greater monthly cash flow. When we add in the investment from the note purchase plus the down payment, we have gross cash to seller $237,600. Subtract closing costs, subtract your finance consultant fee, subtract the real estate broker commission. Net cash to seller $65,900, the same as in the traditional sale versus $32,900 from the previous scenario. 84 payments of $5,900, total monthly payments $495,600, plus the second lien maturity, the balloon payment in 7 years, $347,668. Total cash to seller for this transaction $909,000 versus $542,000 from the previous scenario, and compare that to the $450,000 in equity. Of these three scenarios, which do you think a motivated seller would choose? We then go on to talk about the benefits of a higher yield and lower risk with the wraparound note. This is aimed at persuading the note buyer or private financier to invest in this transaction. We are leveraging the first lien debt from a liability into an asset because the 9.75% interest applies to the entire wrap, including the underlying debt that's being paid down at a lower interest rate. We then talk about the due on sale clause. Yes, most residential home loans have due on sale clauses. However, lenders do not want the property. They want the payments. If you keep the property in good condition by maintaining the fair market value and you keep the payments current, then there's no reason for the senior note holder to foreclose. They would be throwing away a performing asset in exchange for a high-cost, vacant, non-producing asset. That would be insane. And when we maintain the investment to value ratio at 80% or less of the purchase price, that gives us sufficient equity margin to offer cash for keys for a deed in lieu of foreclosure and then resale the asset to redeem the senior lien and our investment, or we can simply resale the property with a new seller financing wraparound note, and the 10% down payment is split between your finance consulting company and your private financiers. You can also arrange investment groups where you bring in multiple private financiers to invest in a single wraparound note. Now, they're not buying the note. They're simply lending the money to your company to buy the note, and you are giving them a promissory note for their investment and securing that note with a hypothecation agreement so that in the event that you default, you can then convey that seller finance note to your private financiers in full satisfaction of your obligation. In this scenario of using an investment group, more than one private financier to invest and be collateralized with other private financiers in a single note, that is a security, and you'll require the services of an experienced securities attorney to arrange the offering documents. And then a final wrap up explaining how wonderful your company is and your contact information. This comes straight out of the worksheet in the Mail Merge Header tab. There are 3 PowerPoint templates, one for the buyer, one for the seller, one for the financier. The seller presentation will also go to the real estate broker that is listing the property. The proposal for the financier only goes to your best buyers, the third-party note buyers or your private financiers. Do not show it to the property buyer or the property seller or the listing broker. It's none of their concern how much yield your investment is making. There are several other mail merge templates that use the comma separated values text file from the Working with Realtors spreadsheet. You can look through those mail merge templates at your convenience and use them as appropriate. This has been Working with Realtors, video tutorial number 1. My name is Jeffrey Smith, and thank you for your support.